Here today following a very recent visit to Kurdistan, and what we intend to highlight today is what we saw firsthand when we were there. In particular, that we repeatedly asked and continue to ask that the Turkish authorities comply with their international obligations. They are a member of the European Council. That means that they should not be holding prisoners in isolation like they've been doing with Öcalan. It means that prisoners should be having access to their family, something else that has been denied to Öcalan. And we have a very simple plea to the Turkish authorities. The key to unlocking a lasting peace settlement between its Kurdish minority and the rest of Turkey is freeing Öcalan so that peace talks can be resumed. Without Öcalan being freed, there can be no lasting peace. Clearly, nobody wants this conflict to continue. The leadership of the Kurdish people and its leader, Öcalan, have been very clear that they want to enter into talks, into negotiations, to ensure that a lasting settlement is put in place. It's now time for Erdogan to do a number of things. The first one is to comply by Turkey's international obligations. And that means ending the isolation of Öcalan. And the second, and equally as importantly, is to restart those peace talks and to ensure that a lasting settlement is put in place so that Öcalan is also released and a lasting peace can be secured. I was one of the members of that delegation. I've got 3 colleagues alongside me who visited Kurdistan.
We were able to meet politicians, trade unionists, campaigners, lawyers, doctors, and most movingly Leyla Güvenli, hunger striker, who today will be, I think, on her 114th day on hunger strike. There are 313 prisoners throughout Turkey and Europe now who remain on hunger strike seeking a lifting of the isolation that's been imposed on Öcalan for 20 years. The 20th anniversary of that isolation fell on the Friday of our delegation to Kurdistan. The leader of our delegation had requested from the Minister of Justice in Turkey a meeting with Öcalan on Imrali Island. Sadly, our written request did not receive any reply. Those we did meet were uplifted by the fact that international solidarity exists there. They do feel, and it seems to me personally, that this is an issue that has been under the radar, in particular of the mainstream media, for too long. Over 30 million Kurds exist in a stateless position. A war has continued for many years, and without movement in relation to Öcalan's position, it seems to me that a lasting peace is a very long way away. The request the delegation made was not for anything as radical as immediate release. The request the delegation made was simple: that international law and Turkey's own laws require that solitary confinement should be exercised sensibly, with access to lawyers, access to family. Those things have not been allowed in the case of lawyers for some 8 years, and in the case of family, 1 visit has been allowed in about 3 years. These requests are not difficult to comply with. The lawyers we met in Kurdistan said Turkey's laws are fine, but unless the state and the judiciary are prepared to make those laws apply, nor use of those laws at all. Thanks very much.
Well, you know, was probably the one of the least informed of the delegation when I went out there. And what really struck me was how the women were at the forefront of the protest. Obviously meeting Layla was a real, it was an inspiring but also a harrowing experience to see a woman, you know, so very fragile and so very weak and in so much pain, but then so full of spirit and life and determination. And also meeting the Peace Mothers. Again, I mean, it was a very moving experience to see a group of women, mainly 60 plus. We met one amazing woman who was in her 80s, who was facing 15 years imprisonment for protecting her son's grave. But again, as I you know, adding to what Paul's just said, it was just the shock that how this has been ignored on a global scale, on a European scale. I couldn't comprehend that this, and coming back from Turkey and people saying, well, what were you doing over there? And people had no knowledge whatsoever of the plight of the Kurdish people over there. And the shock that a member of parliament could be on hunger strike and it's not headline international news. So, yeah, for me, it was a real, it was a fact-finding mission, a real eye-opener. And yeah, as add to what Paul and what Manuel said, it's about, you know, in our little way, you sort of feel slightly inadequate as a group of sort of Westerners going over and going, what, you know, but the appreciation for us being there was really overwhelming and humbling. And we just hope that, you know, we can spread that message, we can get, you know, like I say, we don't want major things, we just want, you know, Öcalan to have visitors' rights. You know, that seems pretty horrendous that we're even asking for that. So, yeah, thank you.
And I find it absolutely astonishing that in this day and age, somebody who is forced into prison can be treated in such a manner that he's isolated and not even had access to his own lawyers since 2011. Has only met his brother. His last visit of anybody was in 2000, earlier on this year. It's absolutely astonishing, and this sort of treatment from a country that classes itself as being part of a civilised society, quite frankly, is astonishing. I want to say a number of things as well about the hunger strikes. It's not just Layla who is the most prominent. There's about 300 people on hunger strike in Turkey at the moment, protesting about the isolation. And I think they're very, very brave people indeed. One of the other things that came through to me was the repression of independent trade unions in Turkey. No question about that. We have good relationships with a number of unions in Turkey, in the federations. Manuel was also able to talk to some train workers' unions as well, which is fantastic. But if you look at what's happened in recent times, you've had 3 major incidents in Turkey that prove that the state now is colluding to break the trade union movement, independent trade union movement. There has been the arrest and imprisonment but subsequent release of shop stewards at the Renault factory, which was again absolutely astonishing. You've had the murder and assassination of the president of the Rubber Workers Union on his way to represent his members at a company, and then of course now this horrendous situation that's coming to light at the new airport in Istanbul, where there has been a number of accidents, and in order for the government to make sure that there's no publicity given to them, there's even doing things like ambulances who've been called to the site told not to turn on their lights or their sirens because they just don't want any publicity. They reckon that there have been a number of fatalities, lots of injuries, and again that's been, if you like, covered up by the government. And finally, one of the things I found absolutely astonishing but not surprising is the government are supporting yellow unionism for its own ends, and in particular in the public services. And a number of unions told us, and lawyers, that individuals who want to apply for a job in the public sector If your parents or relatives are members of an independent trade union,
Correct.
then you don't get the job. I mean, that sort of thing is absolutely reprehensible. Where we've got to think about is what we do in the future. And, you know, Simon's here from the campaign, Freedom for Ursuline. We've got 14 unions now signed up. And I think our job after visiting the other week is, when we get the report done, to have something that we can give to delegates at conferences such as the TUC and the Labour Party, and to raise the profile of this.
Correct.
This is about Ursuline, who is, in fact, in our view, a political prisoner and the Mandela of the Middle East. And it's time that we got the mainstream press and the mainstream media to understand how serious this is. From Unite's point of view, we'll be giving every publicity we can. We did interviews yesterday with our own communications team. We'll be publicising the campaign in our union magazine and also on other blogs and websites to raise the profile. And I think it's really important that the unions in the UK really understand what's happening and get behind the campaign.
I actually went over to Strasbourg for a demonstration. That demonstration was attended by over 40,000 people. That's a really big number of people to turn up to a demonstration. And there was one very simple demand at that demonstration, and that was to end the isolation of Öcalan. And I said from the platform, when I addressed that massive crowd, that if any of the hunger strikers did die, that their blood will be on Erdogan's hands and that of his terrible regime. Because the demands that are being made by those people on hunger strike are really easy to resolve. All that Erdogan has to do is comply with Turkey's own laws.
Yeah.
Never mind their international obligations that Turkey has signed up to. This is not rocket science. This is something that can be resolved, and resolved very easily. So my plea again today, because I know there's a few here from the media, is that you get this message out, that this is a situation that can be resolved incredibly easily. All the Turkish authorities have to do is to implement their own laws. And if they do that, that will end the isolation of Öcalan. Clearly, over and above that, what we want then to happen is for the Turkish state to restart its peace talks with Öcalan, because, as Paul rightly said at the start, if that doesn't happen, peace will be a long time in coming. And everybody wants an end to this conflict, and we want a long-lasting, peaceful resolution to be put in place. And the other thing I did warn Öcalan, and I'll finish, I did warn from that platform about Öcalan and the struggle of the Kurdish people, that if any of the hunger strikers that does die, and I hope it doesn't happen, because the Turkish state can stop this any minute it wants, but if they do die, I did warn Erdogan and the rest of his cronies that we will never forgive and we will never forget. I emphasize this very widely. What we want now is our branches to pass resolutions, our branches to affiliate to the Freedom for Öcalan campaign. But I think the key here, as Maxine pointed out, is that not enough is known about this within our country, and I presume within many other countries. So part of our role is to inform people of what's going on. We can do that with our own membership, but hopefully that will start some kind of trend that can make known across the world what the issues at stake are. Because I think if most people, most civilized people, would think that making a demand that is as simple as the Turkish government complying with its own laws is not asking for the world. It's asking for something that they should be doing anyway. Tony?
What I think we need to be doing with our own members in trade unions, and this is very, very important, is to highlight what is actually going on in the country, but also to explain to those colleagues in our unions, if this was happening in the UK, people would be absolutely up in arms. If people were being arrested, stopped from I mean, we do get anti-union activity, but when you get the leader of a union assassinated on his way to represent members, then I think we've got to sort of make sure that our ordinary members, and activists in particular, shop stewards and reps, understand what's going on. I think there's two things we can do. One is, I think there's got to be a further delegation, if possible, an international delegation, consisting of lay members, shop stewards and reps, if possible, from some of the key TUC unions, or even including some of our unions in the European Union and elsewhere. Don't forget, the European Union can do a lot more than it currently is, and this is one of the things, again, we'll be raising through our European bodies such as Industrial and Uni. And I also think that it's not unreasonable to ask our members who are shop stewards and reps to raise this at their constituency Labour parties, because a lot of our members are involved in their constituency Labour parties and trades councils as well. Correct. And I think we can do that. We need to build up, like we did before with other campaigns, to where we get a critical mass of support, and then we can do the things like the TUC and the Labour Party conference, where we can get a much bigger audience and get much wider coverage. But in getting lay members on the shop floor, lay delegates to bodies, our executive committees involved, I think that will certainly begin to build things up, Matt.
We met with the HDP whilst we were in Turkey, and their view is quite clear, that not only Erdogan's party but the main opposition party together are both riding on a nationalist wave into these elections.
The CHP.
And it's only the HDP that's taking a different view. So there's not even the official opposition standing up to take a non-nationalist view that might otherwise help the position of the Kurds. So yes, I think certainly that's what's happening. Without the rule of law, where do any of us stand? And the ridiculous position has become now this in relation to access to Imrali Island, that whereas a year or two ago we were told this by the lawyers there, that the position would have been we can't make facilities available because of some legal hurdle. Now there's no pretense about that. They make up stories about the boat is broken. Yeah. So we can't. The
sea was too rough.
They say that the
weather wasn't good.
If the boat's not broken, the weather's not good, and looking out the window, the sun is shining and it's not windy. But most recently, and most worryingly, they don't even now bother with those stories. Yeah. What they do now is simply ignore the requests for access, and with that kind of disregard for the rule of law, then the whole framework of the system is in jeopardy. I agree with you, and how much I can do personally, I don't know, but I'm prepared to try and to extend this to other lawyers, because one thing we all have in common here in the UK, for all that we've got our own faults in the system, is that the rule of law essentially still stands here.
It's very clear to me that Erdogan used the excuse of a failed coup to do a coup of his own. He has jailed all the journalists that were against his regime and were critical of what he was doing. He has jailed judges that would probably try to abide by the laws of Turkey. He has jailed trade unionists. He has jailed lawyers. He has jailed anybody who has stood in his way in terms of trying to hold to account the government of Turkey to its own laws and the rights of its people. And the situation is critical. Clearly, there was already repression against the Kurdish people before this happened, so that has just intensified. But there is now widespread repression against anybody who takes up their heads and says, I don't agree with Erdogan. I met people from our sister trade union, who were telling me they are being harassed. Ordinary rank and file representatives of a trade union are being harassed now by the Turkish authorities. So the situation in Turkey is very critical in terms of it being any kind of functioning democracy, to be brutally honest. And of course, that is amplified far worse when it comes to the treatment of the Turkish state to its Kurdish minority.
He is, as the leader of the Kurdish freedom movement and the broader freedom movement in general, the democratization movement in general in Turkey and the Middle East, the imprisonment of Öcalan represents the imprisonment both of an identity and of notions of democracy and freedom in that region. And I think that is very clearly demonstrated by the manner in which the Turkish state's treatment of Öcalan in prison reflects their treatment of both the Kurdish population in Turkey and the opposition in general across the country and across the region, including northern Syria. When there was a series of peace talks between 2013, 2015, talks to begin peace negotiations. These talks were premised upon a roadmap to peace that Öcalan had outlined in terms of, he specified a plan for the state to both democratize itself and delegate autonomy to different peoples and groups within the state framework to realize both a democratic nation state and freedom for different peoples, freedom of expression within the country. And the talks that were modeled off of those, that program, during that time, everyone that we spoke to while we were on the delegation said that there was an atmosphere of peace, democracy, and freedom of expression in Turkey at that time. And after the talks break down right officially, after the June 2015 elections, which is when Erdogan loses a parliamentary majority. Erdogan's AKP government loses a parliamentary majority, and HDP wins an unprecedented 13%. After that, talks break down. There's crackdown on civil society organizations, crackdown on HDP, imprisonment of MPs, and the imposition of the aggravated isolation against Öcalan, and no one has visited him since. The Turkish state fears Öcalan because of his ideas and because of the power he holds to bring peace to the region. They spent 15 years calling him a terrorist, and then sent government officials to meet with him in Imrali prison. They understand the power that he has. They understand that he is the one who has the power to say to the armed struggle there to lay down their arms. If there's the Turkish state tried to get Öcalan to declare an end to the armed struggle, and he would only do so on the basis of certain guarantees from the Turkish state to move forward with the negotiations that they were not willing to make. So he refused. The Turkish state knows the power that he has, and they fear that power. So they try to isolate him, and everyone that we spoke to says that the isolation of Öcalan represents the broader isolation strategy that the Kurdish, that Turkish security policy takes against the broader Kurdish population. They impose curfews on cities. There's an embargo on all opposition in the media. They isolate the issue and pretend like it doesn't exist, and they hope that if they can isolate it sufficiently, then it will go away. And I think both Öcalan's resiliency and the resiliency of the movement in Turkey and in Kurdistan in general shows that that will not be possible, that is not how that struggle will end. And I think that the Turkish state, that there's this broader underlying issue of the Kurdish question that underlies a lot of the issues that take place across Turkey and Syria as a backdrop for where all of these different security policies and ups and downs come from. But Öcalan has written something that represents a solution to the Kurdish question. And I was told by someone quite recently that the issue now is not that there is a Kurdish question, but a Turkish question. And the issue is how the state will address that question of its own nature going forward. The key finding that I took away from this delegation was the extent to which the rule of law has been undermined in Turkey. That there is a complete coalescence of all judicial and at a lot of times even local legislative branches with the central government, with Erdogan and the AKP party, AKP government. And there is no area outside of this branching blanket of security policy that is allowed to say that anything with a suspicion of affiliation to so-called terrorist activity is totally exiled from society.
And how the state have conflated the idea of trade unionism and terrorism. So
Yeah.
people are afraid to join unions
Yeah.
because they'll be accused of being terrorists. And that relates entirely to everything else that's going on there. But that's a point I want specifically to make, because I think it's a frightening position.
That's, I think, it's really encouraging and really inspiring, and I think it's something that we can, in Britain, we can learn, and through the world we can learn a lot from, that these women seem to be at the forefront and are making huge sacrifices.
Yeah. And to Ursula himself, that he's not on his own, he's not forgotten about. 70 years of age in isolation on an island in the Bosphorus. That's barbaric.
Going to win, Öcalan will be released, and Kurdish people will have justice.